Welcome, everyone. We're delighted that you can join us for this session at the Learning Planet Festival. Really want to thank the festival organizers and Learning Planet Alliance and the Learning Planet Institute in Paris for making this space available for what I think promises to be an exciting session. And I just want to let everybody know, remind everyone that we are recording this because we'd like to archive it and have it available on the Bridges site in due course, and share with our partners as well. So I'm really excited about this session because maybe we could put our mutes on if those. Yeah, great. I'm Stephen Hartman. I'm the executive director of the Bridges Coalition. And the Bridges Coalition is a sustainability science coalition of the Management of Social Transformations program, which is whose secretariat is managed in the UNESCO Social and Human Sciences sector in Paris at UNESCO headquarters. And we have a number of events that we're sponsoring here at Learning Planet Festival. I will not get into much detail about Bridges now, except to say that we're a fairly new initiative, though we've been a few years in the making, and we're intended to support the integration of not only the arts and the humanities and qualitative social sciences together with natural sciences and technical fields and in the sustainability science domain. But we're also equally interested in supporting other communities of practice, indigenous communities, local communities, and those people or groups of people who have been outside of the mainstream science policy interface in the sustainability science domain. And so we work both sort of transversally between academia and civil society, but also we work within the academic sphere trying to link up different knowledge domains that need to cooperate more closely with one another if we're going to be coming to terms with and making really positive forward movement and action on the social and environmental crises that and challenges that we're facing in our lifetime and for generations to come. So I'm with the generations to come angle, I really want to point up how excited I have been and how looking forward I have been to this particular session, because it came about through a series of conversations that took place beginning earlier last year with IMVF in Portugal and the People and Planet Report project that's being led by there. And then later, as IMVF and the People and Planet project were integrated into a COP27 session that Bridges led in Egypt, I had the opportunity to meet the author of another report, the UNESCO report on youth-led climate action in the Arab region. Both of the reports have an angle on youth and climate with some distinctions between them. And I think it makes most sense to let the main presenters of the two different reports distinguish how they may be different from one another, rather than get into that too much right now. But we were very interested in the cross-regional aspect of these two reports and what we might be able to learn from that, as well as the learning dimensions more generally and implications of these reports when it comes to youth engagement and action on climate. So the first presenter that I'm going to introduce, and I'm going to introduce them as we go through each segment, is the project leader and the project manager for the author actually for the UNESCO commissioned regional report on knowledge for youth-led climate action in the Arab region. She's an independent consultant with 15 years or more of international development experience working with international organizations and UN agencies on social and human development issues. Her name is Marwa Al-Cairo, and I hope I'm doing justice to your surname, Marwa. And Marwa specializes in youth development, education, employment, and mental health, as well as on migration and climate action. So with no further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Marwa and let her give a clearer sense of this report. Thanks very much, Marwa.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Stephen, and good morning to everyone from my side. I'm grateful to Bridges and to the Bridges Coalition for inviting me and to being part of this conversation, and to IMVF for supporting in the organization of today's session. So thank you all, and thank you to all of the participants who are joining from different parts of the world. So today, I first want to start by asking all of you, and please, go ahead and put this in the chat, and then we can go back and visit what you have shared in the chat. And maybe Juliana, if you don't mind, you can support in helping. We can read off what some of the answers will be shortly. I'm going to be speaking to you about the youth climate action in the Arab region, and that intersection with knowledge. And what does that really mean? So before we get started on that, I want to ask each of you, who is a youth climate actor? Again, it's who is a youth climate actor? If you could put your thoughts in the chat, and we'll revisit that shortly. So why this topic, and why is it so important? So of course we see climate change is on the rise. Every month, every day, we're seeing changes happening in our world, and this is alerting us. And more than ever, youth are coming from all over the world, and they are saying, we need change. We need something to happen. And more communities are mobilizing, and more youth communities are mobilizing, and they're mobilizing on a country level, on a regional level, on a global level. So this report and this process recognizes that, while also recognizing that at the heart of youth climate action is knowledge. It is that interaction with how young people learn, but also create, but also disseminate their information. So a couple of years ago, UNESCO had an e-consultation with many youth from all over the Arab region, where they asked them, what's important? What do you want to be focused on? And knowledge and learning came up as critical issues. So this report was commissioned by UNESCO Cairo, and it looks at 3 different dimensions. On one level, there is a need to understand, where do young people source their information? Once they source that information, what is it that they're creating? What are they generating? What knowledge are they putting out into the world with their climate action work? And then it's, how are they disseminating it? How are they using it? And what is the impact that they're making? When we talk about youth, of course, youth is a very broad term. It could be understood in different ways, in different regions, countries, contexts, in different ways, for different socioeconomic, political reasons. For the context of this report, and looking at the reality of the Arab region, we defined it as those who are between the ages of 18 to 35, who live in the Arab region, recognizing that the Arab region is filled with different ethnicities, different backgrounds, youth from all sorts of different education levels, ethnic levels, religious levels. And so really looking at that broad stream of who these young people are that are operating in their space, in their different local contexts. And then these are the 19 countries that fall under the Arab Regional Bureau of UNESCO Cairo, which are in front of you as well. And just to emphasize that this report looks at what exactly is the knowledge process that a young person engages in. It's not necessarily trying to get a pulse of what is their knowledge of a scientific climate concept. It is, what are they doing to engage with the knowledge processes that we just discussed. So before I turn over to this, Juliana, I'm not seeing that. Oh, yes, I am seeing the chat from my side. Okay, but I did not hear from some of you. So I will let you know what the report produced in terms of who a youth climate actor are. So after an initial landscape analysis, we saw that there's multiple different types of actors. These actors are activists, they're researchers, academics, journalists, entrepreneurs, artists, and other types as well. But the prominent actors who reported back through the report, through the survey, through the focus group discussions, in-depth interviews, through the landscape analysis, were 52% activists, those engaging on a civil society level, engaging on a grassroots level in work around climate action. The main age bracket that we saw is between the 23 to 29 age bracket, again, in that 18 to 35 larger bracket. And it was pretty split between young males and young females as well, almost at 50-50. With a geographic distribution, but where we saw a lot more activity was between the Levant countries as well as in Northeast Africa. And these could be for different reasons. And as we'll discuss in a little bit, of course, throughout the Arab region, there's so many different political, economic, social realities that also impact where the prioritization of climate action comes in. And that comes out in the discourses of how young people also refer to their work in youth climate action. Young people are motivated by a sense of responsibility and a sense of passion, and also because they're starting to feel the impacts of climate change. They use digital and non-digital methods, but they also learn at the university level. Many of them, some of them, start also as early as K through 12 as well. Their action focuses on their countries, but some of them also work on regional and global levels as well. A lot of them on a voluntary basis. We are seeing more who are engaging in climate-related jobs. And a lot of them have also started to get more engaged in the past 5 years. And that's for various reasons we can discuss at a later stage. So these are youth climate actors, and we needed to find this baseline before we could actually go into the knowledge dimension. We realized that at the beginning of the study, there really wasn't an understanding of who these youth climate actors are in the Arab region. So that was the first part of really conducting the study. Then we were able to understand what are the knowledge processes that they go through. When we talk about knowledge, for those of us who were deep and ingrained in academia, a lot of times we have a very specific sense of what, the knowledge processes, the deep rigor of academic research. But here what we're looking at is a very broad idea of what knowledge is. And to focus on this, there's this quote right here in front of you. Knowledge is produced when people make sense of their world, and knowledge is based on their experience as they construct tools, methods, and approaches to cope with situations facing them. So here we're really looking at traditional and non-traditional modes of knowledge production. We're seeing where social movements, environmental justice activism are really broadening the idea of how young people and people in general of all ages are interacting with knowledge on climate and also other topics, of course, as well. So you see the traditional scholars, you see the grassroots mobilizers, you see a mix of both, and you see a convergence of the traditional and non-traditional spaces at the same time. So the transformation of the knowledge sphere in the current moment that we're living in the digital transformation that we're experiencing, is really creating new senses of what knowledge maker, producer, and contributor are. So when we look at the sources, we see that it's not necessarily books or academic articles that necessarily are the top source for a lot of young people, but it's conferences and training workshops where, of course, the culmination of lots of analysis on reports and everything is presented, but that's really their primary source of information. We see that sources vary by the type of youth climate actor. They rely on digital sources. A lot of them utilize reports that are from non-Arab sources. A lot of them are English sources when it comes to the academic production. And we can get into that, and we can get into knowledge production within the academic sphere shortly to provide more analysis on that. At the same time, there's a utilization of non-academic sources, and these could originate from Arab or non-Arab sources. So conferences, trainings, awareness campaigns, social media campaigns, etc. as well. Three very core parts that came out when we discussed sources is that there are limited reports and studies that are originating from the Arab region as well as about the Arab region. Youth had a plea, were very, very eager and thirsty for contextualized information. And this is a challenge, this is a gap in information that they saw, as well as limited and outdated statistics on climate so that they could get into the granularity of the type of change and impact they're trying to make in their communities, as well as a unified climate change lexicon in Arabic, as well as other local regional languages that exist across the Arab region as well. And where various communities speak other languages also. So, but the idea is that this lexicon around climate is not there, which also impacts the way they source information. When it comes to production, we see that young people are producing, they are creating, and I know we're going to be hearing from some young people already who are doing this type of work today. One of the actually the data points that came out of the report that surprised me and that surprised us was really that 50% of youth reported that social media posts were their primary source of a knowledge product. Now, when we understand academic research today that's coming out, for example, on how social media is really impacting and creating what knowledge means in today's world. And there's a very strong impact, for example, on the impact of YouTube, on the impact of other social media platforms as well. Maybe we start to understand this, but this was an area where we dug deeper. We did several focus group discussions to understand more about what is it that they mean, what is it that young people mean when they say a social media post is a form of a knowledge product, and we can discuss that further in the discussion. But of course, knowledge products vary by the type of youth climate actor, just like they do when we discuss sources. Academics, researchers, there's a nuance between these two that I can also discuss with you. They continue to focus on academic or scientific articles. Activists, journalists look at social media posts. Journalists also reported equally that their opinion pieces from colleagues, from peers, from other news agencies and article and media that they respect is also a source for them. And what we also see is there's a growing number of artists, maybe not many, but a good number that are growing and that are creating pieces of clothes, art pieces, cooking pieces, forms of different types of cooking, where they're also expressing their conception and their knowledge products on climate action. So here I definitely will not go through all of these, but in the report, we feature 20 different knowledge products and the processes that young people went through. These go from e-trainings to PhD dissertations to reports on the study of the medical universities and integration of curricula related to climate action, to awareness campaigns and the processes around contextualizing these for local communities. Just all to say, a plethora of knowledge production that is taking place. And the key takeaway for a lot of young people here was that although this work is happening and although production is happening, there's still a need for more skills training and mentorship. And that's not only on the scientific understanding of climate change, but also on research and methodology processes as well. And then maybe the last 2 points on knowledge production are really that for young people to feel that they really are able to operate and produce in this field, they really need a stronger enabling environment. Research and development hasn't always been prioritized in the Arab region, and that's for various reasons, politically, socially, economically. That's not necessarily, that we'll get into the details of today. And this isn't only necessarily linked to climate, it could be for lots of different issues. But they were saying that, it's very important that they feel that there is this enabling environment that could support them. So some young people, for example, will go to other countries, other regions of the world in order, for example, to get this specialization around different climate or environment issues. The one other thing in this report that's very critical is this issue of language and how the intersection between language and knowledge. In knowledge production, youth mostly focused on Arabic, or if they speak other languages, those languages. That's really when it comes to production, and that's because they want to impact people. In sources, there was more of a focus on English, but that's because a lot of the global information that's being created on climate is more so in English than it is in other languages. Finally, on dissemination, and perhaps maybe not a surprise that a lot of young people utilize digital modes to distribute their knowledge, products to distribute knowledge on climate action. But this is not to undermine the power that youth believe in non-digital avenues, where they believe that in-person element is really key to making that effective impact on the communities that they're trying to discuss climate adaptation with, for example, trying to discuss ways of addressing climate issues, challenges that their communities are facing in a very real way every single day as well. And for most of them, 80% of them felt that really it's their desire to spread awareness, to make change, that's motivating them, that's mobilizing them to do all of this work. When we post them on, what exactly is it that young people are feeling about their impact that they're making, we'll see that there's a lot of neutrality in how they feel they're impacting, different networks, or they're impacting different decision makers, or the different types of, conferences and the voice that that's happening there. Many are in the neutral zone of where impact is so far. Of course, we're talking about a very, short time span of just where most of them reported that they've been active in the past 5 years. And we know impact and change and transformation takes time, and it's a process. It's not something that just happens overnight, of course. But the good thing is that there are many who are also saying that they do believe a lot of impact is being made. And the most important takeaway and the most important piece of all of this is that there's a passion, there's a momentum that can be built on by stakeholders, and that should be welcomed by stakeholders in the self-perception of how young people feel they are contributing on this issue. So when we think about the recommendations, here we're talking about 3 different types, 3 different levels of recommendations. We are talking about, on a short term, young people want to feel they're communicating with different youth groups, they have cross-regional opportunity, and there's training and mentorship opportunity. On a medium term, we're looking at curricular integration in education systems. We're looking at the support of developing the environmental journalism sector, and the creation of this Arabic lexicon that we're speaking about. And on a long term, because this is process and systems based, it's looking about how that enabling environment and the research development sphere can be bolstered so that more young people feel that they have the support to work in this space. Really, as we think about, and in conclusion, we're talking about 19 countries with completely different realities across the region, and a lot of and very complex realities as well. So we can't speak about everyone. Of course, we cannot, of course, speak that this is the same in every place in every region. Of course not. But this was a regional report, and we looked at a very regional level. When we go further into different countries, different communities, we're going to see different realities as well. It's a very heterogeneous part of the world, and this report recognizes that. We also see that there's a global urgency, momentum is picking up, and as different notions around what climate action means change, the landscape of knowledge will change. Knowledge needs are going to continue to grow. There were 331 youth recommendations that came out around 23 thematic areas of where young people feel that processes need to improve around the intersection of knowledge and youth climate action. And then finally, really to address this, to increase these needs, to bolster these needs around learning, around knowledge, around education, around youth engagement and youth-led climate action. It's a holistic approach. One and foremost, a belief in youth potential, access to resources, focusing on the education sector as a space where climate action is happening and is active, mentorship, and then on a long term, the enabling environment. So I'll stop there. I'll look forward to your questions and to the discussion and to hearing from my peers and colleagues as well as we interact together. Thank you very much. And also thank you to UNESCO colleagues as well for commissioning this report. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marwa. That was a very rich presentation that gave us a multifaceted look at this report that I think will be a very helpful starting point for our discussion. I'm going to now move over to the second report, the People and Planet Global Report, and we're going to be hearing from several people in the articulation of what this report had to say, and also maybe some of the ways in which it's similar to the UNESCO report in some ways in which it maybe is a little different. And I'm going to leave it to the team to elaborate those points, but I'll be introducing now Andrea Oliveira, who's an international development professional with about 16 years of program and policy experience, and her work with over 15 countries included focus on youth empowerment and civil society participation. And Andrea right now is supporting the coordination of the People and Planet Project on behalf of IMVF in Portugal. And I'll let you sort of pronounce the full name of IMVF, Andrea, and I'd like to turn it over to you and your team. And maybe you could introduce Colombia in the process of the presentation, since you'll turn it over to her. Or to Columba, rather, sorry.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephen. And good afternoon or good morning to all of you. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here. And for the presentation also. So here, as Stephen mentioned, today I'm going to talk about the People and Planet, a common destiny project that is led by the Portuguese municipality of Louros and is financed by the DEAR program of the European Commission and the Portuguese institution of Camões. And just before I jump into the report, I just wanted to introduce you to the project. So what is the project? The reason why we're here, actually. So the project has this vision of reinforcing the voice that young people already have for the fight against climate change, and reinforce their linkages also to how can they further advance the global agenda. So by bringing in the reality of what are the sustainable development goals at the global level to the local channel, we work with young people and with municipalities and other development actors to ensure that young people can have a role. They can change their own approach as individuals, but they can also be part of a broader agenda and support the decision-making in a more participative way. So this is a common vision that 17 partners from 8 different European countries and Cape Verde share, and that brought in this support under the shape of the project People and Planet. And here you can see all the different partners that we have, and to guide the approach of the projects and of the individual partners in each national context, we developed a report that is what we would like to bring you here, that is called European Youth and Climate Change, a Community Baseline. So this report today, we're going to look into the global chapter that basically accumulates national results, but there is also a national chapter per all the different European countries that are part of the program. So it is interesting indeed, because the report, just by methodologically speaking, differs from what Mara was just introduced indeed, because it is a baseline report. So the idea is actually to identify what are young people's perceptions, knowledge, actions on climate action, so that it can inform our project. And it was based on a survey with almost 4,000 people from all the participant countries, most of which are young people, but young people in this case means between 15 and 35. So we're talking about an even more varied array of cohorts. And actually the respondents, it was interesting also, Mara, to see the difference between gender participation. Here, we actually had a much larger participation from female respondents, about 3/4 almost were considered female. So this is actually, it's a report led by the public, people who may not identify themselves as youth climate actors, but it was indeed a very broad collection of feedback that helped us informing how should we pursue the objectives of the project. So the key conclusion, and that's also why we're here, was that unavoidably young people do prioritize the protection of environment and the fight against climate change. 3/4 of European respondents consider this to be a key priority. But then, of course, we wanted to dig a bit deeper and understand if their daily lives are already translated into this, and how can we actually reinforce that role. So one of the things we wanted to understand is exactly who do young people think are key actors to fight climate change? Do they see themselves as one or not? So this sample that answered and informed this report actually considers that individuals, not just young people, but individuals in general, need some support, need further support to be active against climate change. So it doesn't mean that they are the best equipped, which is not surprising, because we know that to fight this challenge, this crisis, we need quite a lot of systemic answers, but they're also not the most inexpressive. And this is exactly where the project tries to put its emphasis, is about the fact that young people, and all of us actually, have a key role to play on the fight against climate change and for sustainability. And how do we try to do that? So we've been asking young people, what do they think will be the best way to motivate further engagement? And one of the key points was indeed linking to the enabling environment that Mauro mentioned, unavoidably education and school curricula. So for that, all partners, some with bigger emphasis than others, work a lot on formal education, non-formal and informal, as a way of creating the roots and actually from there spreading the knowledge and ensuring that there is an uptake of that knowledge into a change of attitudes and practices. Because the project is very oriented for the role of local authorities in bringing in these young people's voices to their own decision-making, we are also eager to understand what can local authorities do to further enhance the role of young people. And the conclusion was actually one of the key priorities was financial support. So the project, and in several of our countries, supports a sub-granting mechanism, which is basically a funding line for third parties, especially for young-led organizations that want to develop their own action to create some climate awareness, but more importantly, to mobilize other young people. There's been also some emphasis put on the need for participatory projects that are based at the community level, and to emphasize this role of the local reality and how relevant it is. So local challenge to identify local solutions, and the participation in decision and policy making processes led by local authorities. So because of that, the project has been actually supporting the creation of youth-led groups in each country that they themselves can actually come up with recommendations for the local challenges that they prioritize. One other point we wanted to understand was the linkages that young people see between climate change and water scarcity. And whereas there is a clear link in some of these aspects, it seems to be a common, well-known interlinkage between both. The expression invisible water is not that common, actually. It's not something that young people take up in their own list of concerns, let's say, or in their priorities to be mitigated. So because of that, we've been, the People and Planet project has been emphasizing the need to focus on water scarcity and how our individual behaviors may have an impact that not just on the long, but also on the short term. And for that, we developed a campaign that I would like just to leave you here for a very quick, and I hope you can hear it, for a very quick spot of the campaign Water of the Future that tries exactly to emphasize this interlinkage, and what we do on a daily basis has an impact.
Our water reserves are rapidly draining out. By 2025, there won't be sufficient water for agriculture to produce food for everyone. By 2050, 4 billion people will live in areas affected by water scarcity. A camel can survive with no water for more than 3 weeks. Us humans won't last more than 3 days. We're not camels. Use water responsibly. Go to waterofthefuture.org.
So this water, we're not camels, is a kind of, it's a tricky expression that actually people react very well. It's a good way to catch people's attention and to actually start a dialogue with them. And that has been happening throughout all our countries of implementation. Apologies. And I just wanted to show you a very messy slide, but in this case, it's deliberately messy because it's in order to show you the richness of the experiences that we have in all the different European countries where the People and Planet project is being implemented. We do have a diversity of ways that are linked to formal, again, formal, non-formal, and informal education. and through which we try to mobilize even more young people and ensure that that knowledge that is passed on is uptaken somehow, right? So it was very interesting also to hear Mauers refer to the role of artists, because this is something that we're doing in some of the countries, the use of artivism, while actually producing a piece of art, being able to discuss sustainability and how we produce that piece of art, for example, through upcycling, actually can convey 3 different messages simultaneously. And this has worked out very well with young people, especially understanding that the project started at the end of 2020 at the time of pandemic, right? And young people are used to see ourselves behind the screens, and they were finally able to start putting hands on a job, as a way of saying. So these are just some examples of everything we do. And I will just stop here and thank you very much for your attention and leave you our website. And I know we're going to have more space to see similarities between the findings of both regions and differences, but so that we can actually also showcase a bit more in detail what the People and Project is doing. I would like to pass on the word to Colomba, our lovely colleague from FELCOS Umbria, who is a partner in Italy implementing the project. So Colomba.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much to the Bridges Coalition, to the Learning Planet Festival. So I will kickstart right away. Kind of a collage, really, because all of the production of knowledge and knowledge products are very much in the making as regards the People and Planet project. Let me get to the full screen, and I would like to kickstart from here because this is very much our guiding principle as regards FELCOS Umbria. We are an association of local authorities, and as Andrea said, this project brings together state and non-state actors. So as Association of Local Authorities, we were founded in 2007. We have been front runner for sustainable development, education, and global education since 2011. As you can see, climbing up the ladder of engagement is very much the approach that we take in all our activity relating with development education and global citizenship education. The timeline there, as Andrea said, it's the timeline of the project. It's a multi-annual project. And I think this is interesting within what is the major European funded program for awareness raising action and development education, which is the DEAR project, because allows for a large time span, it goes for more than 1 year, so we kickstart in the 2020 and we will be finishing in 2024. So we are entering the 3rd year of the project. This allows somehow all the implementing partners to kind of gauge the depth of the engagement in relation with youth. Of course, signing a petition, taking part in a training workshop is not the same as being on a long-term advocate, a multiplier, so reaching the higher end of the pyramid. However, this type of action at European level does allow us really to climb up the ladder of youth-led knowledge and youth-led engagement when it comes to climate action. The guiding principle for us as Association of Local Authorities are process, partnership, place, and purpose. These are the 4 Ps that really stick to it, obviously within the domain of informalities when it comes to development education. Let me go. I wanted to bring you a sense of the place where we are, because I think this is important, also bringing back to the 4 guiding principle to our approach in relation to youth-led knowledge and youth-led action. At the moment, we are been engaging, actually, the process started last year in the localization of Agenda 2030. We're based in an inland region, county, of Italy, that's Umbria, count for 92 municipalities. For the process of the localization of Agenda 2030, our county was divided into 6 areas for sustainable development, for localizing the Agenda 2030. This is very important because this is very much the playground for us in relation to implementing the activity of this specific DEAR project, People and Planet. This localization process for us as an association again of local municipality from the beginning was a matter of a grassroots approach. So we did it via territorial forum, which were set up, moving along the dimension of the Agenda 2030. So people, planet, peace and prosperity. Partnership is not there, but because partnership is the one dimension of Agenda 2030 that embraced them all, embraced people, embraced planet, peace and prosperity. So this was very much a grassroots approach where many different stakeholders took part, obviously municipality, school communities, higher education institution, enterprise. So as very much as Maura was kind of reading through the report, the UNESCO report, again, this is very much a ground for a multi-stakeholder action and approach. And the reason why I wanted to kind of briefly illustrate to you the process of localization, because in this project, being a state and non-state actor involved in it, at the very beginning, we kind of thought that the best way to implement the activity was really to allow for youth to really get a real sense of how climate mitigation, adaptation was playing in the context where they live, they study, they work. And this is why the very reason that we kind of approach this as a kickstarting of a dialogue between youth and the different actors within their communities, especially local authorities. This is the state of play so far in the project, bringing back to our county, to Umbria. So far we have engaged 26 municipalities, over 600 youth have been engaged, 15 experts, and also civil society organization. This approach, which is very much place-based, process-based, allows also for plug and unplugged activity to take to develop, you know, as regards the production of knowledge and knowledge production. And for example, when I mean by unplug, we brought in interpretative walking, data walking. This is an activity which was played out during Water World Day in March 2022. Because to really get a hold of how the landscape, the environment is changing because of climate change, is something that you really need to kind of cross and walk through. So these were 4 different multi-prior actions taking place during, as I said, Water World Day in 2022. Over 175 students were involved, 40 kilometers of hiking and walking. Of course, because we are in the domain of informalities, we had training. And again, as Maura say, you have identified a lack of lexicon, for example, when it comes to climate action. We are building this lexicon by also taking this approach, which is very much creating, you know, a common ground for youth in this county, in our county, to co-develop their own lexicon via plug and unplugged activity, with the help, obviously, of experts which were involved in this specific multi-prior action in March, again, 2022. Moving along, this is some picture from the action itself. I will go very quickly because I know that there is a very strict timekeeping in place for today. So this is one of the product knowledge that were produced. It's an interactive map. Obviously, this was developed over a long period of time, kickstarting in October 2021 and leading to June of last year. Sorry, here there is a QR code. You can point on it. You can download the map. It's in Italian. You can listen to it. You can. There is lots of media content, and the map was obviously there is a major theme, as Andrea was explaining earlier, that link and interlinks all the activities within the People and Planet project. That is water. So youth here really delve very deep within, obviously, their surrounding. We are in the southwest region of Italy, of the Umbria County here. A questionnaire was developed for local producer, obviously mainly agriculture. A questionnaire was developed to local administration to really gauge their perception of climate change in terms of mitigation and adaptation. But again, as I said, it's a quite complex, layered product of knowledge, which I will invite all of you perhaps to point to the QR code, download it, and perhaps you can navigate and go through later on.
I'll just mention, Colomba, that we're about 6 or 7 minutes over time right now. So.
Okay, I will go very quickly. This is another type of activity by organizing a boot camp involving eco-designer, going back to artistic practices. Again, a boot camp here. We played out different type of action in public places to obviously kind of raising awareness. Here, a tree in a public place, which turned into a trash bin. Another type of call to action in a public place, a kind of agony aunt played out by youth for youth in a public place. And this brings me to this e-twinning space that we have created. I saw in the chat earlier that our colleague from Fondo Gallego also encouraged for face-to-face audiovisual activity. Here we couldn't have a kind of face-to-face in-person audiovisual activity, but we created a peer-to-peer exchange space for video making and storytelling between two school communities. One community in Umbria County. I know that some of the students are connected to us today, which I say hi to all of them. It's a high school in Perugia, Cavour Marconi Pascal, and also the Azmar College for Gifted Students in Suleimania Governorate in Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan. So here we created, as I said, a peer-to-peer exchange experience for video making and storytelling, linking the People and Planet project with a UNDP project called Peer-to-Peer Cooperation to Foster Water Management in Suleimania. I think that I can introduce the next contribution to this panel, Andrea, because I think we're running out of time. The next contribution comes from Suleimania and from the Azmar College for Gifted Students and from Nigar, Ismail Mahmoud, the principal of the school, who's going to be telling us how this twin space environment for youth on water played out. Along with Nigar, also there is a student who took part in the project. Over 30 students were involved, and that's Ogar Hamad Amamin. So I will ask Nigar to join, and so that I can share some of the picture that can contribute to her own contribution.
And while we move on to that next sub-presentation, I'll just mention that we did have 30 minutes, just sort of more interactive discussion that we were going to begin now, and we can eat into some of that time. I think it would be really good, though, to leave some adequate time for that. So I'll just remind the presenters that at this stage, if we could try to stay to the time plan of 5 minutes each for the two presentations, that would be very helpful.
Okay. Hello, Nigar.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Colomba. As you all know, Iraq has had fortunate situation regarding our natural resources, but due to the lack of care and neglect, the fortunate source has been turned only to poison that we drown in today. Our education system has left no time for teachers and students, as the focus has only been on exams and programs. The lack of communication between the university and the Ministry of Education and other governorate agencies has made it difficult to obtain and exchange information. Also, the lack of necessary program and the aimlessness of our education system to solve the environmental issues. As a principal and educator at Asmar College for Gifted School students, in my school, we have worked continuously to raise awareness among young people about the environment, be that lessons or curriculum for environmental issues. We have also tried to build many relationships with universities and other agencies to inform our students about the regional and global environmental issues. Also, we participated in many activities with the NGOs such as JCC, Global Citizen Courts Organization. They were able to play a significant role in raising awareness among young people who were given the role of leaders by the organizations to implement environmental information in school in the form of seminars. Recently, we participated in the program, peer-to-peer program, which is realized by FELCOS Umbria Association and Suleymania Governorate, in which our students communicated with other students in a school in Italy. And the benefit of the e-twinning peer-to-peer program, two different cultures getting to know each other via its most vital generation, the future of both nations, and also having water as the pretest of the meeting between the students paved the way for a deeper mutual understanding of what truly is valuable for all of us equally as human beings. Currently, we're preparing ourselves for an environmental festival also take place on the 6th of March 2023. We will focus on several environmental issues. I'll let my students to talk more about the peer-to-peer program with the Italian school. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. So I participated as a student in part of the Umbria Association's program, peer-to-peer twinning program, and it was a valuable experience in many ways. It helped me understand many of the issues that we face today, that is teaching young people and the youth about many environmental problems that we currently face. The biggest of them can be characterized as a dissociation that can be seen in the younger generation. This can be seen in part due to many problems that may be the education that we're giving the youth. In many parts, the education that we're giving to the youth is basically focused on subjects and many things that don't really teach the students how to act. More or less, it is information that a student just memorizes and goes with it. It doesn't really make us alive, or more or less do things that we want our own way and make us more active. In a way, it restricts us and it doesn't really help us move forward. And this way, when you teach young people about the various environmental problems that we face and how we can fix them, we really don't feel like learning, and we don't really feel like going along with it, because there really isn't much space that is provided for us. We can also say that with the programs that are given, there really isn't much of them. Like currently, thanks to Umbria's association, we have this peer-to-peer program and learned a bit about science education and how we can communicate various scientific subjects and how difficult that can be from an educator's perspective, and learning actually how important all of these things are and ourselves actually doing these things. But in part of the actual whole country and the region, there really isn't much support behind the students and the youth, and generally anybody that wants to make the environment a better place and make the society a better place. And this way, this is all I can say in part. Just a really big issue that can be characterized with a very big dissociation on our part. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Gar. Thank you, Ms. Nigar. So, Andrea, can I need to kind of roll on, moving to the next to the next contribution. Thank you so much indeed. I think that creating an enabling environment for youth-led, issue-based narrative in this specific case on water within climate action, it was a very valuable experience, something that we're going to be continuing nourishing. Moving on to Amal Usman Barghouti from Palestine. And the reason why, as FELCOS, we wanted to bring to the panel Amal, representing our association. It's within another international cooperation for development project. We are engaged and involved in Palestine, and with which we are going to be creating synergy again, as we did in Iraqi Kurdistan. And the project is Land Local Authorities Network for Sustainable Development. It's a project co-funded by the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation. And Amal is going to be leading also all the activity with youth on the ground. And Amal, I'll leave it on to you to explain your approaches, methodology as regards what we are going to be developing together in synergy with the European project. Thank you.
Thank you, Columbia. Thank you all. Really, I'm delightful to be part of this panel sessions and to get to know what other countries are doing to fight against the climate change, because this is not seized on a geographic area, it's a global crisis, and we are all touching it nowadays with the change in the climates in our countries and on our regions. Here in Palestine, I want to first an educator and part of civil society organization. We felt it's education a powerful tool to engage the youth, the students, to advocate for protecting the environment and fighting against the climate change. So in Palestine, you know the context first, there are many challenges for us. It wasn't easy to how to go to implement such a project in a unpolitical situation in Palestine as a country living in occupation, under occupations. people hear concerns, all the community, all the institutions, the official governments, also, the priority is being given now to the protections. But climate change is a critical issue, and start with the motivation by the civil society organizations, with the stakeholders, actors in the country, felt it is important to be engaged in tackling these issues. So there are recent initiatives by the civil society organization. One of them, it is what we are implementing here in Palestine in cooperation with FELCOS, with also the local authorities. Since we don't have such knowledge and information among the youth in Palestine, we are going to work with the schools, marginalized area, and this is put in our concern, that we are going to work with the communities and areas that maybe internet access or some resources are lack of it, made us to create and put an intervention that suits these areas, and how to engage youth in mobilizing to be an actor for climate actor here in Palestine. So we're starting, it's very important that we work with the teachers first. We ran with the training the teachers on methodologies, approaches to work with the students, concepts of the climate change, how to deliver smooth information to the student to understand, be aware of this global crisis. Then they transfer all the knowledge, all the information they received from the experts to the students by establishing environmental clubs inside the schools. So the students, the youth, then have their own open spaces to develop interventions, activities that suit their communities to fight against climate change. For example, we are working with the youth in the school levels, on the primary and secondary level, to lead initiative on a community in a community by tackling a problem related to environmental issues like solid accumulations, waste accumulation, because this is a big issue here in Palestine and in certain areas. They are working with the local authorities on one hand, how to find the solutions, how to tackle this issue, find the solutions to get rid of this problems, the solid waste accumulation. On the other hand, raising awareness to their peers. We felt that students, when they are engaging or interacting with their peers, the delivery and the awareness is being very easily with other children. So they are using approaches like theater. They are using theater to work with the primary level for the children to understand the context, the problems, to get more knowledge about the climate change. They're using also we work like an approach in you will learn by doing, you will learn by experiment. While you are engaging and working on these issues, you will gain, the student will obtain knowledge and skills from the practices. Also, they are not, we are helping them, not only providing the information, also we are trying to mobilize their resources for the youth in the schools in order to communicate and interact with other actors in the country on the local level and on the national level to lead advocacy that influence the policies in Palestine, to take into consideration how to employ environmental agendas on the governmental level, on the organization level, that will lead to good practices and good behavior for the protecting the environment. We are implementing this project this year, as I mentioned before, yes, with the 8 schools in Palestine. They are in the south and in the middle and north of the West Bank. After we train the teachers, we are going to develop, we're going to provide all the necessity requirement for the youth in order to lead initiative on the local level to tackle these issues and to find and to raise awareness through different approaches. One of them is going to be safe, the social media, but with a safe platform for their age to, in order for the awareness sessions for other schools or other children in the country. This is the main main things. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Amal. And sorry, just leading back to again to Marwa report, you can see how important it is to really be structuring connection also within the different modes of engagement. I think digital and non-digital, it's also very important the way you integrate different type of modes in youth-led knowledge and youth-led action. So thank you so much, Amal. I'm really looking forward to creating and structuring connections with you for 2023 and also going forward.
Yeah, thank you.
And yes.
Thanks to the entire People and Planet project team and project team, and I want to move us into now the final or next to final stage of the largest part of the session going forward, and this is going to be led by my colleague Juliana Gavich. You've heard her referenced by a couple of the speakers so far. Juliana is the capacity building lead in the flagship hub at Arizona State University for Bridges, which means that she's building capacity, working on helping build capacity, not just in that hub, but in the global coalition and in the network of hubs. So Juliana is a transdisciplinary, transboundary scholar practivist working in service of justice, healing, and regeneration for the planet. She's committed to meaningfully engaging youth in diverse communities around the world as leaders in transformational climate and sustainable development action. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Juliana. We've got about 20 minutes is what we have before we'll then need to sort of tie up with a very brief word at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you to our wonderful speakers today. So this is going to be as interactive as I hope our participants across the session, not just the panelists, are willing to engage. So we'll do a little bit of a test on that. I'll begin with some questions for the panelists to start, but then please post in the chat any questions from our audience that you have, and then we'll, if you're open to it, ask you to actually pose them yourselves. But also we're going to ask you to respond to some questions. So consider this kind of an open discussion and let this flow freely as much as possible. So just to get us started, I did have a few questions I wanted to just raise to start to draw out some of those commonalities and differences across the different efforts that have been presented to you today. So for our panelists and the speakers who just shared about those two specific contexts, I'd like to ask, did you notice any common themes related to youth climate learning and engagement across the different knowledges that were shared today? And anyone, not everybody has to answer, especially since we're limited on time. So feel free to raise your hands or, put up the virtual hand icon, and I'll call on you to start. Marwa, how would you?
Yeah, well, thanks, Juliana, and thanks to all of the great speakers as well. So I would just say, I think there are several themes that came up just quickly. So I have my colleagues can also chip in. One, I think, is around localization and contextualization. I think across the board, that was a theme. Second is really around the enabling environment. That might mean different notions in different places, but I also heard that from Hogad and Iraqi Kurdistan, that as a young person, he also felt as a student that they needed more support in the work that they're doing, for example. So I think across, whether we're talking systematically or as young people feeling it, I think that's also something. I think this connection around the lexicon and what that really means. I think in different spaces where, you know, in the project Columba spoke about, they're developing it, but the need is still there, that the need of developing it and what it means is still there as well. So those are the three main ones, and then I'll turn it over to others to also have a chance to say some thoughts.
Thank you, Marwa. How about other speakers? Andrea?
I can just jump in and say quickly, for me, what is really screaming is the importance of experiential learning. So hearing everybody, like, we know that formal education has a role to play, but actually thinking a little bit outside the box and exposing young people to new realities and to this exchange does contribute quite a lot to the uptake of knowledge, right? Not just pass it on, because that's also another level that we can discuss.
Any other thoughts from the speakers? How about some differences? I know we had some really unique challenges that were faced within the different contexts. We'll get to that in a minute, but in terms of some of the major things that you were seeing as takeaways from your projects or what you're planning to implement, any other thoughts?
If I may, again, just
Sure,
definitely a difference between both reports is, and that I found very interesting, is that whereas quite a common action that drives young people in the Arab region would be voluntary work, our report found actually that's one of the less common activities that respondents did, right? That's also another caveat we need to bear in mind. Our respondents might not have been youth climate actors. Nonetheless, they had some interest to respond to the survey. And voluntary work is something that was not as expressive in our survey as it was in the Arab region. So that's very interesting to see.
Yeah, I was picking up on that as well. I also wanted to add that something that I saw was really interesting was sort of what are some of those different pathways, like how were youth being, what their perspectives about climate action? Was it something that was seen as more of this activist, like it's not necessarily authentic if you're trying to pursue this as sort of a professional career, or is it more like voluntary? So as like sort of that's the true blood activist there, or are you really seeing this as more of a professional pathway, a lifelong career opportunity? And I imagine that difference is great across different regions in particular.
I also think it depends, just to quickly chime in on that, Juliana, it's where the nation is in the moment as well. I mean, the prioritization in economic sectors around where different jobs are created in that sector, where it's being prioritized, I think will eventually reflect where young people will start to see themselves in this work. But as more education programs, as more governmental programs are created in these spaces, I think we'll see, and as private sector also starts to engage in these types of activities, I think that'll slowly grow. But where it is right now is also reflective of where the general priorities, I believe, in the nation are as well.
Absolutely, very good point. Any other thoughts before I ask another question that I'll start with the panelists, but then we'll open it up actually to the audience as well. Any other thoughts on the commonalities or differences? Andrea, did you have something?
Actually, but it would also be interesting to hear from the participants if they don't have a screen, because linked to the voluntary work, it also has to do with the knowledge that pre-exists. And our report, the People and Planet report, what it shows is that, and I wonder if participants have the same feeling, is that young people, at least those respondents of the report, are more familiar with global policies to tackle climate change than what they can do at the national level.
Yeah,
this is our finding. I don't know if you feel it. So I guess that might also be a trigger for not being more proactive in their own local context, which is what we're trying to mitigate. But I don't know if the rest feels the same, if they would agree with this finding of our report or the way around.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hands for the rest of the audience or post in the chat, just kind of a quick response to that. What are your comfort levels with sort of the global knowledge base versus the local context? And is that a motivator in how you choose to respond with climate action, if you do at all? So any thoughts on that from either some of the other speakers or the broader audience? Stephen, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just had one quick question, because the focus of the European report is at the municipal level. They both, of course, have international dimensions within the region. I was curious to know how much sort of localities or municipal level data was brought into the Arab region report?
Sure. So much of the Arab regional report was truly focused on the region. And so we weren't necessarily looking at data at a very granular municipal level, but really trying to do that first landscape analysis of looking at the region as a whole. However, as we were speaking to different civil society organizations, grassroots organizations, youth, climate actors in different countries, a lot of the nuances around that work came up, and those are defined and discussed in the report as knowledge products, as case studies, as areas, that require further focus in different regions, context. So on a macro, it's looking at a region. When you go a little bit more specific into the report, those nuances start to come up in how youth identify the types of products they work in, as well as the knowledge processes and the challenges and gaps a lot of times come from what the local contexts are that they are experiencing. So for example, a young person could have created a product in their country, in Iraq or in Sudan, for example, but a problem that they had there was limited data, limited statistics, something that's very outdated, for example, and they couldn't get into the granular details of what that is. I'm just saying this as an example, not necessarily something specific, but what we started to see, and this is where the survey supplemented and bolstered this is actually a region-wide phenomenon, limited data or statistics. So a lot of the times what you're seeing on the local level is also very much represented on the regional level as well, and they speak to each other, and that has larger reasons and explanations of why that may be the case.
Thank you, Mara. Building on that, you started to talk about some of the challenges, so I'd like to open that up for others who are interested in sharing some of the challenges that you're facing in the work that you're doing, and this can be also to the broader audience as well. How are those challenges really impacting the way that, or the opportunity to co-construct a learning society with young people in this fight against climate change? You can elaborate on some of the things that you started to point on in the work you were doing today, such as the access to knowledge or those underlying motivations behind how youth devote their time and attention in one. Some of the different access points I noticed in terms of the way that knowledge is made accessible. So the modalities, as Columba was really pointing to, some of the shifts in political conflict and instability in some of the local contexts, I imagine is a really big challenge for many youth to engage and put their time and attention, or maybe it's a motivator in different ways. So any thoughts on some of the things that you're facing?
I mean, I think a really big one, especially as it comes to in knowledge, because knowledge is such a unique space, which as one of the speakers, I believe, Andrea, speaking about the formal, non-formal, informal, I mean, no matter where it exists, it's spaces and there are different learning environments. And I feel that young people, wherever they're operating, feel that they want to feel supported, that there's a belief in them. But it's belief is one level and it's maybe the first marker, right? But at the same time, it's also that the voices are being heard, that it's not tokenistic, that they're truly being engaged. For example, something that was really important for this report that we did for UNESCO was that we had a youth advisory group body that was, engaged in, being part of the report development process, so that we hear the advice, the guidance, the thoughts, the feedback of young people in the report, for example. So it's this type of engagement where it's important, but also on a more macro level, systematically, if systems aren't in place or education systems aren't in place that are sort of bolstering the different levels of knowledge that are required, because this is such a huge global issue, as Emel was saying, in Palestine, then it's also this idea is, where am I going to get it? If I'm not getting it from those systems that are around me, where am I going to get it? And that's why they turn to so many different platforms in order, I feel, to gain that knowledge. And they create it, and that's why they also create it. A lot of them said that they're creating it because they're not finding it, right? Yeah. And so when they don't find it, that's when they start to create it themselves as well.
I'm curious to kind of go off the cuff a little bit. Disinformation is a huge problem. And I'm wondering if you face that, how you're actually actively trying to intervene with disinformation so rampant, especially across the digital space. That landscape is is really difficult to contain and control in any direct way, how that knowledge is being vetted and who's accessing it and such. So I'm curious if that was an issue that came up in some of the work that you've all been doing. Any thoughts? Andrea?
I don't want to remove the space from the colleagues, that's the thing, but if I may just also to get the ball rolling, not necessarily just to build upon that, because the information, what we feel, and here I'm speaking on behalf of the consortium of the project, the most common challenge that people feel is how to ensure the long-term engagement of young people, because they can access the information. The information is there, even though it's not structured, fully agree, but the knowledge is there, but is there the level of uptake that allows for knowledge to actually translate into changed practices, you know, at individual action or even collective one? And I think that's quite a lot of a challenge that most partners that we feel. It's how to ensure that there is this ongoing motivation, picking upon the key word that you use now, Juliana, for me. How can we actually ensure that these groups are still there, that there is still ongoing engagement? But it would be great also to hear from Gore, I'm not sure, our colleague from Asmar College, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name properly, because, and apologies if I'm not.
Yeah, from Ogar. I don't know if
Ogar, thank you.
If you're still there, I think it would be interesting, even, you know, to very frankly.
And just to say
And,
super quickly also from Amal, because for example, changing behaviors, we know it's extremely complicated, regardless which sector is. The idea of the environmental centers, it seems great because we know it works, for example, with health young people centers, right? That works in several contexts. So just to hear a bit also from you, if you feel the same kind of challenge that we are feeling.
Gar, would you like to share, or Amal?
If I would just want to add something, what Andrea mentions that during our work with the government, we are here talking about the Ministry of Education, we found that they developed like an environmental policy. But when we interview with the teachers and we discuss with the students, we found there's a gap between they don't know about this policy, they don't know anything about what's the ministry on the ministry level. That's why we thought how to link, how to provide this awareness for the students about this policy, how to take this policy on upper level also, and also there's to be like monitoring mechanisms also to ensure that these guidelines, policies, good practices regarding the protection of environments and the climate change to be tackled, to be also documented. This is also a huge effort that's need to be worked on it on the other stages later here in Palestine.
Thank you, Amal. I also wanted to pose this, and perhaps this is not something that is necessarily seen across different cultures and contexts in the same way, but something that I've been witnessing and working with youth and others, my colleagues on even, is this idea of climate grief and how to cope with that, and the emotions that raise in people and sort of the linkages between how is that a motivator or how is that actually pushing people away from action because it's almost like they've lost all hope. And that's something that is kind of a fine balancing act, especially among young people who are constantly seen from the activist space that the people who are in those power situations are failing us, basically, or failing them. And what does that mean for them to continue to push against those barriers and feel like they're not necessarily making the difference that they want to make? So it can raise a lot of mixed emotions and create sort of this pent-up grief in trying to cope with what those changes are and the challenges are faced on the day-to-day versus like the reality of perhaps that transformation is not happening in the speed and urgency that it needs to. Any thoughts on that?
Juliana, I think if I can say that, I think if we are really guided by the process rather than an end result, I think this could be really a way to kind of take away and the positivity and opportunity, or to be building knowledge on climate change and mitigation, adaptation as an opportunity, not so much as a reason for anxiety. This could be a way forward. You know, I mean, the level here is multidimensional, is multi-layered. I mean, there are really, I mean, I think we should have a dedicated panel to be talking about the challenges. But I really think that to sustain that depth of engagement is a way forward for a youth-led knowledge on this. I think we need to be working in depth, okay? And with positivity, as this is an opportunity. I think this is also, for us, was a way of really kind of using an awful lot of unplug modes of engagement. Crossing and walking and hiking, and to really start building on those connection with your own environment or where you are. Because I think if you can build a strong connection, it's easier to maintain and sustain that level of engagement, and then going deep with knowledge and be knowledgeable about the changes that you witness, that you see, and perhaps then to be an agent of that change going forward.
Excellent. Mara?
Yes, sorry about that. I just to pick up on what Columba said, I agree, and something from that we learned from this report as well, the UNESCO report, is that there is this momentum, there is this passion, you know, that can be picked up on. So at the same time, I feel that the dose of reality that in the Arab region is that it's also a region that's wrought with so many challenges and complexities in so many different countries. Ahmed spoke about the occupation in Palestine. Iraq, for example, has its own set of situations. Yemen, Libya, Syria, all of these countries are wrought with these different realities. So a lot of times when you talk to young people there on a very, you know, on a face-to-face level, is, you know, they'll say, we have this problem on a country level, on a political problem. We have the occupation, we have this problem, we have this problem, we have humanitarian situation. In Yemen, XYZ is happening. The activism is there, the climate reality, the climate work is happening. The intersection between what's happening with climate and conflict is there. And a lot of times there's interlinkages, you know, as well, even if people don't realize that there's interlinkages that are there. But in a lot of people's minds in the day-to-day, it's like, how do I get on to the next thing? How do I survive? How do I do this? How do I deal with XYZ situation? So climate on a very globally isn't always necessarily understood. You know, when I need to survive, what does it really mean? Even though there is that interlinkage on a very knowledge academic level, and you know, and we know that it's there in the day-to-day, that linkage isn't necessarily seen. People see that there's other priorities that they need to get through, and so it's not necessarily, so it's grief, like to use the word you said, but there's multiple types of grief, and climate is just one of those types of griefs that they're interacting with.
Very good point, Mara. I see Goodness has her hand, or his hand, apologies. Goodness, did you want to chime in here? We're about out of time, so I want to give you a chance to share your thoughts. Goodness.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. Just to confirm if you can hear me. Oh, great.
Yeah, oh, sorry, yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, great. So I am Goodness Dixon from Nigeria. I'm a climate activist and the founder of FELCOS Active Initiative. I was privileged to be one of the delegates at COP17 and COP27 that took place in Sharm el-Sheikh. I've known UNESCO to be into education, and mostly it's for children and then youth. So for us in our climate space, we have been carrying out climate education in schools. Like last year, we had a project called Climate Action Activation, where we activated over 600 pupils and then students in about 3 states of Nigeria. And we we did this with the little funding we had. So I don't know if there is any means of partnership with UNESCO so that we can be able to expand our space and then get to more schools and communities. So thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for the amazing work you're doing. If you could maybe share in the chat some contact information and more about the project, a link or something to a website you might be able to share, I think that would be great. I know we're about at time. Stephen, I see your hand. I just kind of wanted to raise one final thing. So we talked a lot about today the need for an enabling environment, but what does that even look like? So that may not be a question where we can answer today, but I think if we could come away with really starting to think about that for ourselves, what does that look like in your local communities, your local context in which you're working with youth and others on climate action? How can that really be further expressed in a way that is meaningful for youth and can continue that engagement that is so important for moving things forward with the climate space. So Stephen, I'll turn it over to you maybe for the final word, if you wanted to also pose a final question. You're muted there, Stephen.
You'd think that you'd learn this by now, with Zoom. But anyway, thanks very much for a set of interesting questions and some interesting responses in that last session. I would like to end on a question, and I put it in the chat window. So while there's two things I'd like to end with. First of all, I want to thank all of the presenters and all of the participants who joined us today for this discussion. These reports are obviously a rich source of information on, but not necessarily comprehensive, but they're a great starting point, and I think that they open the door to some really important opportunities for further investigation, and then how that knowledge, thinking about how that knowledge can be used for successful strategies of change and transformation. What I would like to do, though, in linking up to the last thought that you just ended with, Juliana, about how we don't have time necessarily to answer this now, but we could maybe begin thinking about a couple of questions, and also linking to some of Marwa's comments at the very end there about the situation regarding human security in the region. I'd like to at least offer a challenge to the partners who've joined us in this session, and anybody else who's here who might be interested in such a thing. Bridges has now been approached by the World Academy of Art and Science I think I need to be given permission to share my screen. Is there someone who could do that for me? Yeah, now there we go. Have been approached by the World Academy of Art and Science and asked if Bridges would like to collaborate on the 6th International Conference on Future Education that the World Academy of Art and Science is having March 7th to 9th. It's an online conference focused on precisely future education for human security. So I will, as this is the website, I don't have the URL right here, but just, yeah, go to, I'll put this in the chat window. So I'd like to at least issue an open invitation to any of the partners that we've included in this session, and people who weren't partners in this session, but who might be interested in dialoguing with Bridges about a possible role in this conference context. This is going to be a really big event, and I think it links up in interesting ways with the final articulation we heard from Marwa and the question that we had ended on there. So if you end up being interested in pursuing that or dialoguing about a possible session at that conference a month and a half from now, roughly, a little less, go ahead and get a hold of me. I put my email address in the chat window. I also put the link to the World Academy of Art and Science conference website in there as well. The last thing I'd like to do, we're a couple of minutes over. I apologize about that. I'm not really a really strong taskmaster as a timekeeper, I guess. I would like to ask this question to both teams, People and Planet, and to the UNESCO report team. The UNESCO report sought to identify opportunities and gaps and challenges that youth-led climate actors in the Arab regions, their experiences about sourcing, generating, and disseminating knowledge. And what I wonder, and I think it's a question relevant to both projects and both reports, are what are the most significant of these, in your view, in terms of the learning challenges, since this is the Learning Planet Festival, and I thought it makes good sense. If you could just take a minute or two to give a final thought on that, each of the two teams, that would be really welcome.
I would just say very quickly, Stephen, and yes, I saw that question in the chat. I mean, the report didn't necessarily study, for example, the level of knowledge that young people have around particular climate issues or scientific concepts. But what did come out in a lot of the discussions, the focus groups, the interviews, the survey, is that young people, they focused a lot around this issue of the lexicon, around climate change concepts, around what it means. And what you see is there's a spectrum of young people who are operating in the space. So the idea of what climate change means, the learning around what the concepts is really diverse across the spectrum, where there are young people who are really cognizant of the terms, really cognizant of the terminology, really engaged, with adaptation, mitigation, the different terms, concepts, how they all interlinked with each other. And there are others where climate, for example, is linked to an idea of sustainable development, for example, even though they might be two different issues. So, right, but interlinked under an umbrella, but we're talking conceptually, scientifically about different types of issues and concepts. Mm-hmm. So even when you see that young people are identifying as youth climate actors, how they're learning the concepts, where they're getting introduced to it, is it an academic introduction? Is it an activist introduction? Is it a volunteer introduction, for example, really impacts the notions of what climate is. And so there's an understanding of what it is, but how it's being engaged, the words that are being around it, the terminology, it varies because, again, there's not necessarily something unified, and B, it's also where that entry point is for young people, where their initial learning is happening, on how the depth of what those terms really mean. So somebody could say they're working in climate, but they could be, for example, working in a completely different space in an environmental field. So there's an opportunity there because they do feel and they do want to operate in this field, but it's just about how is it that learning is unified in a way where it's also going to reflect the local context that they speak about, especially when local contexts are so varied and there's so many, and so different languages, different contexts, different geographies that we're interacting with at the same time.
Thanks, Marwa. And I'd invite anybody from that was a really thoughtful answer. And I'd invite anybody from the People and Planet team to maybe respond. Feel free to jump in.
Colomba, I thought you were jumping in.
Yeah, well, it's really more an extending on what Marwa was saying. It's the learning of all of this that we call climate action. What I can say to Stephen is in the project of People and Planet, there is an activity called Global Green Lab. Youth we have engaged with since the project inception, renamed this activity in Clima X, taking it from, an action for, but also taking it from the ecological meaning of climax. So I think this exercise also of renaming, rephrasing, also suggests, maybe a retracing to what my entry point may be in all of this. We are encouraging youth we engage with to reframe, rephrase, co-create. I think this exercise over lexicon, I think it's a good one to be, all of us to be exercising with, it's a workout for sustainability, even.
Thanks, Columba. Anybody else before we wrap up? We'll finish in another minute or so.
I can just add one very super quick sentence, just reinstating what has been already mentioned, indeed, that this level, the insistence should be indeed at the level of uptake of the knowledge that is shared. And that's why, for example, the project, The People and Planet, is very much about working as a broker for young people themselves so that they can take the lead on the learning dimension they want to take from the information that is being shared and what to do with it. And that's why I feel it was so rich today to hear all the different experiences and how we're actually building upon this first stage that we always need, which is knowledge, so that we can actually change something. But it's really just to reinstate everything that has been shared. So thank you.
Okay. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I want to thank all of the speakers who we heard about your fascinating work from. And this seems to me the beginning of a conversation that I'm sure is going to be continuing in many different contexts moving forward. But Bridges would welcome continuing this conversation with you and looking for opportunities to do that. So I hope we get that opportunity. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Big thank you also to Bridges and to the festival, to all the speakers.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks to the festival for providing.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick.
Is it possible, by the way, Andrea, to preserve the chat from this session? I guess it's on your end that maybe Andrea already left. No.
It looked like it let me do it, Stephen, so.
Okay.
Yeah, you can save chat. There's 3 dots at the bottom. And
Oh, okay. That's how you do it. All right.
I don't know where it gets saved, but
I'm here but mute.
That's
Yes,
the only
I'm doing it
detail.
now also.
All right.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank
Thanks
you
again,
all.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.